Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. It's the tail end of the Campus Tech Conference. We're kind of winding down. Has it been a good show for everybody so far? Informative? Yeah, cool. We know there's been a lot of different topics that have been discussed at the show. And so we want to take things in a little bit of a different direction and discuss security, particularly in IT within higher education. How many of you have heard of a higher education institution being breached this year in the news? Raise your hands. Okay, a few of you. Yep, there's been several higher education institutions that have undergone data breaches this year. And so we want to discuss some potential challenges and some potential problems that your IT could be facing and some ways that we've seen customers solve those problems. And a couple different solutions to how to mitigate these issues, prevent breaches, mitigate breaches before they occur. So we'll get started. My name is Nick Lagalante. I'm digital strategist with Thycotic.
I'm Ben Yoder. I'm the product manager at Thycotic.
How many folks have heard of Thycotic before? Raise your hand. No? Well, good. You're in the right place. We are a software company based out of DC. And we play in the security space and IT operations, IT automation space. So we have a few different focuses. Privileged account management is one of our main focuses, also known as identity and access management. End user password resets or self-service resets for end users, faculty, staff, things like that, as well as Active Directory group management, self-service group management to reduce help desk costs. So a little bit about our company. We were founded in 1996. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C., but we also have satellite offices in Sydney and London. Currently, our solutions are being used by over 100,000 IT admins across the globe, and we are an Inc. 5000 fastest growing company. We have an ever-growing ecosystem of channel partners as well as technology alliances as well, with several very large, very well-known vendors in IT and enterprise security. Now, how many folks in here actually work in IT in their organization? Raise your hand. Okay. And if not, do you work closely with IT or deal with IT at all? Okay, perfect. Then you're definitely in the right place. So the obligatory credibility slide, we have 2,500 plus customers ranging from SMB to enterprise in a variety of verticals across the world. As you can see, a few here. And we work with several higher education customers as well. Georgetown University, University of Texas, University of Central Florida. This is just a brief overview of a few of our higher ed customers. So if you think about your IT teams in your school, what are some risks, what are some issues that they're dealing with today? You've got auditors and compliance, right? You've got auditors maybe breathing down your back, making sure you reach and maintain those strict compliance mandates. You've got external threats like APTs, advanced persistent threats, people trying to come in and capture your data. And then you have internal threats, right? How do you prevent against rogue insiders from selling student data? Or if there's turnover, how do you prevent an insider from going back in and taking down systems or hurting your organization? So we're going to look at several different problems, and we're going to present a few different solutions. So in terms of some of the problems that we look at solving, when you look at account management, right, and data, you have human accounts that tie back to people, and then you have those non-human accounts, things like service accounts, root, domain admin accounts, Windows local admin accounts. Today, we're going to be focusing on the non-human accounts. How is your organization protecting, securing, and monitoring the non-human accounts for these devices that are housing very, very serious and important student data? Okay. So the first problem we're going to talk about is a very familiar story. How many folks have had turnover in IT within the last 24 months in your organization? Raise your hand. Okay. So if you think about when an IT administrator, network administrator, system administrator leaves your school, okay, whether they were fired or whatever the situation is, how do you know what systems and what privileges that they had access to, right? How do you know what accounts that they were dealing with every day? And most importantly, how are you able to revoke access from that administrator after they've departed from your organization or from your school? Ben.
Sure. So what we'll focus on with the solution here is our product secret server. And as Nick said, if you're using spreadsheets or KeePass, when an admin leaves, they essentially had access to all the credentials in that. So if you're storing admin passwords, passwords for a database that houses student data, you don't necessarily know what passwords they looked at, which passwords they didn't. They essentially had access to all of them, could have taken them off-site, and they could misuse those or abuse those even after they've left. And a common process when an admin quits or a user leaves, even if it was on good terms, you disable their Active Directory account to revoke access, or their LDAP account, their named user account to revoke access. So what we've got up on the screen is the dashboard for Secret Server. I can see all the credentials I have access to. It's based on permissions similar to a file system. So I only see the passwords I should have access to. If there's another team, I don't necessarily get access to their passwords. Every time I use an account, so if I come in and open up like this Linux account here and copy off the password or unmask the password, I've essentially exposed it. I see it, and audit records gets written in the vault, and then we report on that. So what you can do, and a lot of customers do this, is when an admin quits, they run our user audit report. So this shows for my user year to date, any admin credential, so any generic credential, shared account, I've looked at in the vault that we've got an audit record with. And then you can expire them. The system will go out and change a password on each one automatically for you. So what becomes, or what was like a manual process of going through, you had your spreadsheet. Technically, you should change every password in the spreadsheet. Now becomes an automated process where, at the very minimum, you've got a checklist of accounts that you know they looked at, and you can change those passwords for the specific ones. And at the best case, you can do it automatically with the tool. So just a little recap. So when an admin leaves, you want to be able to audit what they looked at, run a report, and be able to automate password changes. So move that manual process where maybe you miss a password change to become an automated process. And you really want to make sure that's coordinated with HR, so when they quit or move on to a different group, that process is coordinated between the IT team and the human resources team. So reducing exposure. We talked about just being able to change the passwords or know what passwords an admin looked at after they left. The next best thing you can do is reduce exposure of the passwords. We saw when I pulled open the product, I was able to unmask a password. Again, if you've got your spreadsheet, you see all those passwords. So how can you actually limit the access to the systems or access to those sensitive credentials in the vault? Going back to the product. Again, if we pull open this credential, so you've got, let's say, 2 Linux credentials for a server that houses a database. You want to give your admins access to it so they can open up their tools, do their work, and it can be unhindered. The difference here is I have the ability to actually open up a connection using PuTTY here, but I don't actually have the ability to see the password. So it's hidden from the user, but they can still actually do their work really easily. In fact, it's very convenient. I've got a connection open to the server with the privileged account, and the password was never exposed to me. I don't actually even see it. And so that's a great opportunity if the admins can do that. So if you can just go in, do their work, they don't actually need to know the password. The next best thing you can do is what we call checkout. And that's exactly what it sounds like. When you go to a library, you check out a book, you check out a password directly from the system. So now I have to go through a workflow. So when I check this password out, I'm the only admin who can see it for the next 30 minutes. When that 30 minutes is up, the system locks down the password, goes out and sets it to a random password on the target system, whether that's a Linux root account, Windows local admin. A lot of customers do this for domain admin credentials. And so that way, even if I copied out the password, So I can unmask it here, write it down if I want. 30 minutes from now, Secret Server will change it, and Secret Server will only be the only entity that knows the password. So the user no longer knows the password. It's kind of like a one-time password for whatever account you want. So just to recap here, for the solution for reducing exposure, you want to be able to use passwords without knowing them. So reduce that need for the admins to actually have to type in passwords and keep them in their head, and then change them after every use to increase security and ensure that those audit trails are really strong, because you know only a single person knew the password at any one point.
Right. So now who's watching IT? If you think about mitigating insider risk, right? IT has access to those sensitive databases, those sensitive systems that house your student information, social security numbers, billing and processing. How close of an eye are you keeping on IT? Do you actually know what your administrators are doing in those boxes every single day? You want to be able to detect an insider threat or detect some sort of behavior to prevent an issue before it actually happens. So there's a few ways that we've seen customers handle that. Ben, do you want to go into that?
Yeah, we see a lot of customers deploy SIM tools. That's a pretty common practice. For those of you who don't use SIM tools or are unfamiliar with them, it essentially pulls logs from all different systems. So you know an admin account logged into this Windows server, a root account logged into this Linux server, or my named Active Directory user is logging in on the network. So it's a way to correlate different events. You can build rules. So if an account login occurs after 5 p.m., you can throw up a flag. And Secret Server will integrate with that. So if you have your password vault integrating with an alerting engine like a SIM tool, you can then have further correlations. So you may know, for example, an admin account logged in to a server, but you don't know the actual user who's actually behind that generic account. Since in Secret Server we know when I go to an account that's a generic account, it ties my name user into that. So I know that, for example, Nick actually used a generic account to log into the server. Right. The other thing you can do is you can actually monitor. If we go back to this PuTTY session here, and I connect to the Linux server, it pulls open the session, so I'm connected to the server as that user, and the admins inside a Secret Server can actually monitor that, and it's going to record it. So if you need to prove to an auditor or like an internal IT audit, or for example, you want to just troubleshoot an issue, someone misconfigured a server, you can go back and you can either watch in real time or review a recording at a later date to see what occurred when that user was actually on the system. And if I detect misuse, I can actually cancel it in real time. So I can tell the user to stop, and it will actually terminate their session from Secret Server. So then Secret Server just acts as a proxy for those connections in that case, and you can stop the sessions if you detect misuse. So the things you want to do, SIM integration, so you can correlate the privileged account activity to your Active Directory identity, and then actually monitor those sessions. So be able to keep a record of what admins did, so you can prove at a later point, these are the actions that were taken, and be able to capture those keystrokes for things like SSH sessions, and then be able to monitor those sessions in real time. So another external threat we see customers deal with is the Windows local admin account. In a lot of situations, whether it's a commercial organization, a university, there's lots of Windows desktop servers, Linux servers, and so on, and you have a generic local administrator account on every single Windows machine. Time and time again, we come in and it's the same password on every single Windows box for the admin. And maybe it's getting changed every 60 days through group policy or some other procedure, but it's the same on every box. And this is really dangerous because if I'm a hacker, I deploy malware on someone's system, even if it's someone who's not privileged. It could be a consultant or someone who doesn't have access to privileged data. If I get that administrator account out, I'm able to crack it and find out what the password is or use that credential. I essentially now have access to every single Windows system at the root level because the password is reused. So the goal is you want to be able to have a unique password per account because those are really separate accounts. It's not the same account per box. It's a different unique account on every box, so it needs to have a unique password so a hacker can't just pull the password out and reuse it. Ideally, we see, when we go in with a customer, they may have a spreadsheet with just machines and passwords for each one, so you can do some automation of this through scripting or various capabilities. You can also do discovery. In Secret Server, you can come in, you can see a network view of any domain joined machine, and you can see all those local accounts out there. So if we go to the local accounts tab, I can see I've got like an RSA server out there that has an actual credential stored for it. So I know the local admin account has been secured in the vault. With all these others, there's various local accounts out there. I don't know the password to, I don't know who's using them. Maybe an admin has created several accounts that they're just using outside the vault. So you want to be able to import these into the vault and set up rules. So if someone brings up a server, the admin account automatically gets brought into the vault. All right. So the solution, you need to mitigate external threats that rely on password reuse. Things you may have heard of like pass to hash or cracking of passwords, those rely on the same password being used all over your network, and that's a very dangerous setup. So you can use discovery to find all those local admin accounts and either start off just manual imports or email alerts when new accounts are found. And the goal is automatic password rotation. So again, moving it off of a manual process that your admins do to an automated process with unique, strong passwords per account.
Yeah. If there's one thing that you take away from this today, it's definitely the password rotation, making sure you constantly change passwords on those systems. We were just at Microsoft TechEd this year in Houston, and one of the big security focuses there was pass to hash. This is an attack that is not going away anytime soon. In fact, it's one of the most threatening attacks to Windows systems, and a lot of times organizations and colleges are left vulnerable because these system passwords are not changed. So definitely keep that in mind for sure.
I assume there's an agent running on all of the workstations that communicates with the server.
The question was whether there's an agent on all the workstations to communicate with the server. No, there's no agent by default. We do have a proxy agent if you've got like servers in a DMZ that Secret Server can't reach into, but by default the installation is all agentless.
So I guess you just provide the credentials to the server and it does it through RPC commands.
Yeah, it's using like native API calls, and you would use a privileged account such as a domain admin account to take over those local administrator passwords. Great, good question.
So along the same lines, for software that's scripted and pushed out or pulled that requires administrative access, how do you handle that if you've randomized all your passwords?
The passwords are still in the vault, so just to make sure everyone heard the question was how to handle passwords when they're randomized for like a software push process or application passwords. The passwords are all in the vault, so we actually have an API you can use, and we'll touch on that a little later. But you would use the API to then pull out the passwords at push time and use those to gain authorized access, and then the system, after the push is done, could change all those passwords to something unique and random. That's a good question. And kind of along with that is service accounts. So you've got batch jobs that you may be running, scripts with hard-coded passwords. You also have a lot of like Windows services, application pools. With universities, we see a lot of homegrown applications that have been built up. And all of these run under credentials. So there's typically a hard-coded password somewhere. And service accounts are very difficult for customers and clients to manage, because if you change a password for a domain service account, suddenly you have 5 Windows services you need to manually go to, update the password to. If you don't, you have a service outage. People start calling your help desk because a password didn't get updated on a dependency somewhere. And along with the local accounts, you can do the same thing. So I can see on all the different machines out there where a service account is being used. So at the very minimum, even if you don't bring these into the vault, it scans your network and tells you your service account is being used on these 5 servers. So if you do actually change that password, these are the 5 places you have to go update. The next step would be automation again. So Secret Server changes the password on the domain. It can go to each service or application pool, update passwords in flat files with the new password, so you don't have that orphaned service that was left out of a password change and suddenly starts failing because it has an old credential on it. So to kind of recap, the discovery will let you find where service accounts are being used so you don't have outages, and it will handle all sorts of applications there. Like I said, Windows services, application pools, legacy COM+ applications, and we even have PowerShell integration. So if there's a database we don't handle out of the box, you can customize the solution, so that way when a password change occurs, you can update that system.
Okay. So we've talked about things like insider threat, right? Keeping a closer eye on IT, automating passwords on system level devices. But what about the external? So often IT organizations will bring in consultants, right, to help with an installation or to help with a deployment of some kind. And how do you know that these outside specialists or these outside consultants are given the proper access to your systems? And when the job is done, the contract is over, how do you know that that access has been revoked? How do you know that they don't still have back-end access, or that they didn't somehow install a piece of back-end software to gain access to your systems after the contract has been over with? So Ben, could you talk about this for a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of cases, if you bring in a contractor or a consultant, I used to work as a contractor writing SQL scripts for a company that did payroll processing. And when I went in, they would just give me a password to a database that had not necessarily really sensitive information on, but it was just written down on a sticky note, handed to me, and I'm sure it was never changed after I left. So that's a fairly common case we see. You just give a contractor a spreadsheet or a password written down for access when they ask for it. And that opens up a whole new avenue of attack. Suddenly you have outside parties that may be under NDA or under contract, but there's still a third party accessing your systems. You often have to provide VPNs if they're working remotely. So it's a whole new avenue of attack for your systems. With a vault, what you can do is you can throw an approval workflow. I did the checkout where I came in. I was granted access to the secret automatically. It changed the password after. That's great for contractors because if they write it down, they can't access it once their contract is expired. The other thing you can do is you can do a request access. So when I come in, I have to put in a reason. So if I was a contractor and accessing a database or troubleshooting a system, I could put in my information. It can be configured to put in a ticket number as well. So you get that in the audit trail. And then I see this page here with my request. And then someone, let's say Nick's an approver, he's managing the contractors, he would see that and say, yep, Ben can access this system, that's legit, for the next 5 hours or until end of day today. After that, I would have to request access again. So it brings a lot more information to your audit trail. You get those reasons why a contractor requested, what ticket number they were responding to, and you can even have dual approval. If there's a really sensitive credential you want to make sure that no single person can access, you need to have both those keys turned to access the credential. You could put dual approval on it. So I would have to approve Nick, he would have to approve me. Not one of us can just go in and request access and approve ourselves.
Okay, so in terms of authentication, how many folks here actually use RSA tokens every day, or actually have any RSA tokens on them right now? No? One gentleman in the back. Right, so some sort of token, some sort of multi-factor, right? If you think about IT, right? IT should also have multiple levels of authentication in terms of accessing those privileged accounts. So if your IT department right now is storing all their privileged account credentials on a spreadsheet, yes, you can throw AES 256 encryption on that spreadsheet, but how do you know that that person accessing that spreadsheet is who they say they are? So if you're vaulting these passwords or you're using some sort of enterprise tool, you want to make sure that IT uses strong authentication practices to gain access to that vault. Ben, can you speak to that?
Yeah, this is a pretty standard security practice. So if you're using Secret Server or a tool like Secret Server, like Nick said, you want to have additional levels of authentication there. You're not just able to go in with your password. And this is to prevent things like, again, if your password gets stolen, someone goes onto the domain, changes your password, tries to log into Secret Server, they're presented with that one-time PIN code. And what we support out of the box is Radius, which is a protocol for things like RSA Secure ID, Entrust, Symantec. Most commercial two-factor solutions are going to support that. We also support authenticator apps. You've probably used these with like Gmail or different applications there, or like Dropbox. And these are cool because it provides a cheap way to get two-factor to your users. So if you're bringing on students to work at the help desk or different IT functions and they need access to the vault, you can just quickly up their security by letting them use a soft token rather than purchasing a hard token for them. So just to show you what that looks like, I can throw on two-factor for this user with my Google Auth. And then when he logs in, he's just prompted for a two-factor code. So if my identity was stolen or someone had my Active Directory account, they wouldn't be able to just access the vault and pull out those passwords really easily. So there's wide support through Radius. Pretty much, like I said, any commercial two-factor solution is going to have a Radius protocol. Tons of customers use RSA, but there's definitely lots out there. And also soft tokens, if you have an iPhone, Android, Windows Phone, those are all supported as two-factor options. Another advantage is often there are security requirements. You want to say, for this server, anytime someone uses the admin account on it, they have to put in two-factor. Secret Server can sit in the middle, so they access Secret Server, they put in their two-factor code, and then they open a session to the target system. You've essentially put two-factor on all those privileged accounts if you're using things like hiding the password or changing the password every time. So one of our last problems is the one you brought up, which is application password misuse. You may not know it, but you've probably got passwords that are just stored in clear text, configuration files, batch jobs that are running backups all throughout the network. And these are a pretty big security risk because if I access a file, there's no audit record necessarily written saying, Ben opened up this file to make a change. That password was exposed to me, and these are often have some significant privilege. Maybe they're running a backup that's taking a database or a student system and backing it up. I could retrieve that backup using the application password, and no one would necessarily know that I've pulled off production data from a backup. So what we provide is an API. You can see up here is just a batch job that's running an FTP backup. And we've got up at the top, there's the password right there. Even though it's a strong password potentially, it's still in clear text in a file. So what you need to do is get rid of those embedded passwords, and you can use an API to tokenize configuration files, make command line calls directly to the vault, and pull those passwords out. And then it helps with that problem of those passwords never get changed. The vault can manage auditing of those credentials, changing the credentials, and the API doesn't know the difference. So again, if there's another thing to take away, it's getting rid of embedded passwords. This is a really big security risk because you just have clear text passwords with no workflow around them all throughout your network. API can help provide a solution there, whether you're using Perl, PHP, PowerShell, batch jobs, or so on.
Great. So this particular problem is a little less about security, and it's more of time and resource issues with IT. And this is actually something that several attendees at this show have talked to us about having problems. And this is end users forgetting passwords or self-service password resets for faculty, for staff, for students. How are students or how are faculty able to reset their own passwords if they forget it? Is your college's help desk completely slammed with this type of an issue? And how do you mitigate or kind of get around that?
Yeah, so switching off to another product here, Password Reset Server. What you can provide your end users is either a web portal or a hook into the Windows logon screen. And you can either have them enroll, so you go through, answer those standard knowledge-based questions like ones you may customize or ones that are out of the box, like mother's maiden name, street you grew up on. We also support multi-factor, and that's great because if a user gets a text message with a PIN code or a phone call that reads them a PIN code, they can put that in and reset their password, and it's not something they can forget. So just to walk through that process, I can start the reset directly here in the browser. Go through and I'm presented with questions, things like images. When I enrolled, I had to choose several images here. And then a standard text-based question. It confirmed me, and you can set different thresholds, so if a user answers 2 of the 3 correct, they're able to reset. I could reset or unlock my account. And then I'm able to log into systems again instead of calling the help desk. So this is a process that's pretty simple, but you could really reduce load on IT, just because in a lot of cases, maybe you have the manpower, but they could be doing a lot better things than answering phones and resetting people's passwords. All right, are there any other questions from the audience? We had a few throughout, but if anyone else has any questions, we can definitely take those now.
How do you go about convincing your systematics that this is always available? Because at the moment it's that idea that they always know, well, they've got that feeling that they always know they can get to their spreadsheet with their password. But now they've got a system they've got to go to, as opposed to just a spreadsheet.
Sure. So the question was how to convince the admins that the system's going to always be available. There's essentially a few different things you can do. We started out in IT operations, so this is something a lot of admins are comfortable with. As Nick said, we have over 100,000 IT admins using the product. They're comfortable with it. But to give you that peace of mind, there's automated backups you can do. So the restore process is very simple. It's a standard SQL backup. This isn't like an appliance you shove in that's a black box on your network. You enlist the IT team to make sure that it works with your backup and restore processes. And it can also be installed so it's highly available, so there's not a single point of failure. So you can have multi-sites. So if you have a DR site, it can fail over. And lastly, there's a clear text export. So typically, customers will do that as a final DR option. They go in, export their recovery passwords, put that in an Office safe or a safety deposit box. So you're hit with a hurricane, all systems are down, you can fall back to a paper with passwords on it.
Is it a virtual appliance or can it be virtual appliance?
It can be installed on virtual systems. So the question was, is it a virtual appliance? We have customers that install it on ESX, Hyper-V, and so on. But we just ship software, so it's not a virtual appliance.
What's your business model? How do you license your product?
Sure. Do you want to take that?
Sure. Yeah, it's a pretty simple setup. It's 3 components. So you have a one-time edition cost. There's 3 different editions, Professional through Enterprise and Enterprise Plus. And that really just depends on the problems that you're trying to solve. Some organizations who need a little bit of a simple tool, they want to move out of KeyPass, they want to move out of spreadsheets, they'll start with Professional and scale up later. Some enterprise organizations who have more security needs, such as session monitoring, recording, auditing, that kind of thing, they'll go with the Enterprise Plus. So you have one cost for the edition, you have one cost for the users of the tool, right? So if you have an IT team of, let's say, 15 or 20, that's who you're licensing, right? We don't license by endpoints. So if you have 5,000 servers or endpoints, but 15 admins or 5 admins, you're paying for the admins, not the servers. And then the next is a recurring cost, yearly cost for support and maintenance. That includes tech support, which is all done in-house in our headquarters in DC, as well as any upgrades. And we release what?
We
2
have-
to 3 times?
We have a release cycle of about every 3 months,
Right.
and the upgrade process is super simple. You just click through in the application, and it downloads the latest update from our servers, applies it, and you're done. So usually that takes less than 15 minutes for an admin to run through.
Right.
Is that the same, if you were using it for your single sign-on for your, for your password reset for your users? Or is there a different price for that?
There's a different price. They're 2 different solutions. Password reset server is a little bit of a different model. That's based on bulk users, but it's fairly cost effective in terms of other solutions out there. So, any other thoughts or questions? Great. Well, thank you guys for coming. If you have any questions about privilege identity, managing accounts, things of that nature, you can talk to myself and Ben afterwards. We have Coop, one of our colleagues here at the door. If you don't mind, he'll scan your badge on the way out. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for showing up.
Thanks, everyone.
Appreciate it.